I always believed that saving money was the most important lesson my father taught me. Until my daughter Karen handed me a stack of papers on my 74th birthday, explaining why I needed to sell my house. Sitting here in the home I've lived in for 40 years, I realize what I believed about family loyalty was completely wrong. The morning started like most others. I made my coffee in the same percolator I'd bought in 1987, counted out my coupons for the grocery run, and checked my bank statements the way I'd done every Thursday for decades. The numbers on the page still amazed me sometimes. $2.3 million spread across various accounts and investments. Not bad for a factory worker who'd never made more than $45,000 in a single year. My reflection in the hallway mirror showed the same face I'd been wearing to fool my family for years. Gray stubble, flannel shirt with a small hole near the pocket, work boots that had seen better decades, the perfect picture of an old man scraping by on Social Security. The irony wasn't lost on me that my children had never bothered to ask about my finances. They'd simply assumed poverty based on my appearance. The knock on my door came earlier than expected. Karen's voice carried that particular tone she used when she wanted something, artificially bright, with an undertone of barely controlled frustration. Behind her stood Mike, my son, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a teenager in trouble. Ashley, my granddaughter, remained in the car, phone pressed to her ear, apparently too busy to acknowledge my existence. The papers Karen spread across my kitchen table made her intentions immediately clear. Guardianship forms, power of attorney documents, and real estate assessments. The letterhead belonged to some lawyer I'd never heard of, and the language was designed to make an old man feel confused and overwhelmed. Karen's performance was masterful. The concerned daughter worried about her aging father's ability to manage his affairs. Her mouth moved with practiced efficiency, hitting all the emotional notes about family caring for each other. But her eyes kept wandering to the property assessment figure circled in red at the bottom of the page. Mike's contribution to this family intervention focused on practical matters, utilities, maintenance, groceries. He painted a picture of me struggling with basic tasks, slowly declining into helplessness. The concern in his voice might have been convincing if I hadn't noticed him photographing my prescription bottles while he talked. Ashley finally joined us, bringing the energy of someone doing a distasteful but necessary chore. Her comments about outdated technology and old-fashioned ways stung in a way I hadn't expected. To her, I wasn't a grandfather with decades of experience. I was a problem to be solved efficiently. The pressure in the room built steadily as they tag-teamed their presentation. Karen handling the emotional manipulation, Mike covering practical concerns, Ashley representing the voice of modern reason. They'd clearly rehearsed this performance, though they'd overlooked one crucial detail. They'd never actually asked about my financial situation. Their assumption that I was living month to month on a fixed income revealed how little attention they'd paid to my life over the years. They'd seen the modest house, the old truck, the careful shopping habits, and constructed a narrative that fit their expectations. The possibility that I'd been building wealth while they'd been building debt had never occurred to them. When Karen pulled out her phone to show me pictures of the assisted living facility she'd selected, I felt something shift inside my chest. The place looked institutional and expensive, exactly the kind of arrangement that would require selling my home to afford. Her research had been thorough, her planning extensive, her consideration of my actual preferences non-existent. The moment crystallized when she mentioned how the proceeds from the house sale would help everyone. Not just me, everyone. The slip revealed what this intervention was really about. My children weren't worried about my welfare. They were positioning themselves to benefit from what they assumed was my only valuable asset. I watched them exchange glances when I asked for time to think about their proposal. The frustration that flickered across their faces told me everything I needed to know about their expectations. They'd expected gratitude, immediate compliance, relief that they were taking control of my complicated life. My request for a few days to consider the situation clearly hadn't been part of their script. After they left, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by their carefully prepared paperwork. The legal documents felt heavy in my hands, weighted with implications they couldn't possibly understand. My children had just attempted to take control of a financial empire they didn't know existed. Motivated by greed, they couldn't even admit to themselves. The house around me held 40 years of memories, but more importantly, it held the evidence of my secret success. In the spare bedroom closet, filing cabinets contained decades of investment statements, dividend payments, and compound growth that had turned a factory worker's careful savings into a substantial fortune. My children had dismissed my intelligence the same way they'd dismissed my appearance, based on assumptions rather than investigation. That night, I pulled out my real financial records and spread them across the same table where Karen had laid her guardianship papers. The contrast was striking. Her documents were designed to take away my autonomy. Mine represented the result of decades of careful planning and discipline. The gulf between their perception of my capabilities and the reality of my achievements felt like a chasm that might never be bridged. The weight of their betrayal settled over me slowly. These weren't strangers trying to take advantage of a vulnerable old man. These were my children, people I'd raised and supported and loved unconditionally. The realization that they saw me as an obstacle to their financial plans, rather than a father deserving of respect, changed something fundamental in my understanding of our relationship. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by decades of memories that suddenly looked different in the light of this new understanding. Every family gathering where they'd complained about money troubles. Every birthday where their gifts had been thoughtful but inexpensive. Every conversation where they'd treated my opinions as quaint relics of an outdated generation. The pattern had been there all along. I'd just been too trusting to see it clearly. I woke up Friday morning with the taste of betrayal still sharp in my mouth. My routine felt different now. The careful budget shopping, the modest appearance, the humble lifestyle I'd maintained suddenly felt like an elaborate costume I'd been wearing for an audience that didn't appreciate the performance. The checking account I let my family see contained exactly $2,847, enough to pay monthly bills with a little left over, just what they'd expect from someone living on Social Security. The real accounts, the ones they'd never thought to ask about, told a very different story. 47 years of disciplined investing, reinvested dividends, and compound interest had created something my factory co-workers would have called impossible. I'd started investing in 1977 with $50 a month, money I saved by bringing lunch to work instead of buying from the cafeteria. Back then, my supervisor laughed at the idea of a line worker playing the stock market. "Leave that fancy stuff to the college boys, Bob." But I'd spent my evenings reading financial magazines and learning about companies, about growth and value, about the miracle of money making money over time. The irony wasn't lost on me that my children, with their college educations and professional jobs, had never managed to accumulate wealth the way their simple father had. They'd focused on spending their way to happiness, while I'd focused on building security for the future. Now that future had arrived, and they wanted to manage what they assumed was my poverty. My phone rang throughout the day. Karen called twice to check if I'd had time to think about their generous offer to help with my situation. Mike texted reminders about the benefits of professional financial management. Ashley sent a link to an article about elder care that painted a grim picture of isolated seniors struggling with basic tasks. Their persistence revealed an urgency I hadn't noticed during yesterday's presentation. The coordinated follow-up campaign suggested they'd planned this intervention well beyond the simple family concern they'd portrayed. Someone was putting pressure on them, or they were putting pressure on themselves, to resolve my situation quickly. I decided to run an experiment. At the grocery store, I made a point of using coupons visibly, comparing prices loudly, and mentioning to the cashier how expensive everything had gotten on a fixed income. Mrs. Patterson from next door overheard and offered to help carry my bags, her face filled with the sympathetic concern people reserve for the struggling elderly. The performance felt strange and degrading, but it illustrated how completely I'd fooled everyone about my circumstances. My neighbors saw an old man stretching every dollar. My family saw a burden requiring management. Nobody saw a millionaire who chose to live modestly because the lifestyle suited him. That afternoon, I called my attorney. Not the one Karen had selected, but the one I'd been using for estate planning for the past 15 years. Margaret Chen specialized in elder law, and her voice carried sharp concern when I described yesterday's family intervention. Her questions were direct and uncomfortable. Had my family members ever had access to my accounts? Had I signed any documents giving them financial authority? Had they pressured me for money in the past? The conversation revealed patterns I'd been too generous to recognize as exploitation. Margaret's explanation of financial elder abuse opened my eyes to behaviors I'd dismissed as family members asking for help. Mike's frequent loans that were never repaid. Karen's emergencies that always required immediate financial assistance. Ashley's assumption that Grandpa would pay for school expenses without discussion. What I'd seen as generosity, the law recognized as potential exploitation. The most disturbing revelation came when Margaret suggested we review my recent account activity. I'd been monitoring my investments, but hadn't been paying close attention to my checking account, beyond ensuring bills were paid. The pattern she found in 6 months of statements made my blood run cold. Someone had been making small, regular withdrawals from my account. Amounts just under $500, taken on different days of the week, from ATMs near where my children lived and worked. The systematic nature of the theft suggested planning and coordination. My family hadn't just been pressuring me to give them money, they'd been taking it without asking. Margaret's voice remained professionally calm as she explained the legal implications of what we'd discovered. Financial abuse of an elderly person was a serious crime in our state, punishable by both criminal prosecution and civil penalties. The amounts involved, nearly $8,000 over 6 months, elevated the charges to felony level. The evidence was clear and damning. Someone with access to my debit card information had been systematically stealing from me while simultaneously arguing that I was incompetent to manage my finances. The audacity of the crime was staggering. They were robbing me while positioning themselves as my protectors. Margaret recommended immediate action to protect my assets and legal interests. We scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday morning to review all my accounts, revoke any existing powers of attorney, and discuss whether to file criminal charges against my family members. That evening, I sat in my living room looking at 40 years of family photographs with new understanding. Pictures of graduations I'd helped pay for, weddings I'd subsidized, grandchildren I'd supported through college, all funded by the careful investments they now wanted to control. The faces in the photographs smiled back at me, but I wondered how many of those smiles had been motivated by gratitude versus greed. The weekend stretched ahead like a minefield. I knew Karen would call again, probably visit, possibly bring reinforcements. I knew Mike would continue his campaign of concerned texts and helpful suggestions. I knew Ashley would maintain her campaign of technological condescension mixed with financial assumptions. But I also knew something they didn't know I knew. Their theft had been discovered. Their manipulation had been recognized. Their assumption that I was a helpless old man had been proven catastrophically wrong. The balance of power in our family relationship was about to shift dramatically, and they had no idea what was coming. The secret I'd kept for so long, my financial success, my careful planning, my millionaire status, was about to become a weapon in my own defense. The children who'd underestimated their father were about to learn that dismissing someone's intelligence based on their appearance was a costly mistake. For the first time in months, I went to bed feeling something other than sadness about my family situation. I felt anger, determination, and something that might have been anticipation. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. The war for my dignity, my autonomy, and my life savings was about to begin in earnest. I spent Saturday morning doing what any good investigator would do, gathering evidence. The systematic theft from my checking account had opened my eyes to possibilities I'd been too trusting to consider. If my family had been stealing money, what else might they have been doing without my knowledge? My first stop was the bank branch where I'd done business for 30 years. Linda Morrison, my usual teller, greeted me with the warm familiarity of someone who'd processed thousands of my transactions. Her expression shifted when I asked to review all account activity and any attempts to access my records by people claiming to be family members. The conversation that followed felt like watching a crime drama unfold in real time. Linda's records showed that Karen had visited the bank 3 times in the past 2 months, each time asking detailed questions about my accounts, my safety deposit box, and my financial planning. She'd presented herself as a concerned daughter, worried about her father's cognitive decline and ability to manage money responsibly. More disturbing was the revelation that Mike had attempted to add himself as a signatory on my accounts just last week. He'd brought what he claimed were power of attorney documents, though Linda's training in elder financial protection had prompted her to request additional verification before processing the request. My son had left angry when told the process would take several days and require my direct consent. The safety deposit box access log revealed the most shocking discovery. Ashley had somehow obtained a key and had visited the box twice in the past month. The bank's security protocols required photo identification and signature verification, which meant she'd either forged my signature or had somehow acquired legitimate access credentials. Linda's concern was evident as she walked me through the bank's elder protection protocols. My family's behavior had triggered multiple red flags in their system designed to identify financial abuse. They'd been planning to contact me directly to verify these activities, but my visit had provided the perfect opportunity to discuss their concerns face-to-face. I asked to see the contents of my safety deposit box immediately. Linda accompanied me to the vault, and what I found there confirmed my worst fears. Important documents were missing: copies of my will, insurance policies, and investment statements that I'd stored for safekeeping. Someone had been conducting a thorough inventory of my assets without my knowledge or permission. The theft wasn't random or opportunistic. It was systematic, planned, and sophisticated. My family had been conducting what amounted to a complete financial investigation while simultaneously arguing that I was incompetent to manage my own affairs. They'd been preparing for something much larger than simply convincing me to sell my house. Back home, I began my own systematic review of every document, every account, every piece of financial information in my possession. The picture that emerged was of a family that had been treating me like a target rather than a father for months, possibly years. Credit reports showed inquiries I hadn't authorized. Someone had been checking my credit history regularly, monitoring my debt-to-income ratio and overall financial health. The inquiries came from multiple sources, suggesting they'd been shopping for information about my creditworthiness for reasons I couldn't yet understand. My insurance policies had been updated recently, but I hadn't made any changes. Someone with access to my personal information had contacted my providers to verify beneficiary information and coverage details. The customer service representatives who'd handled these calls had noted in their files that the callers had impressive knowledge of my personal details and policy history. The investment accounts told perhaps the most disturbing story of all. While no money had been moved, someone had been calling my brokerage firms asking about liquidation procedures, tax implications, and transfer options. They'd presented themselves as family members, helping an elderly relative understand his options for estate planning. Each discovery felt like another piece of evidence in a case against people I'd loved and trusted my entire adult life. My children hadn't just been stealing money. They'd been conducting comprehensive financial reconnaissance, preparing for some larger operation that I was only beginning to understand. Sunday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor, knocked on my door with a casserole and a concerned expression. Her grandson worked at the courthouse, and he'd mentioned seeing Karen Murphy filing guardianship paperwork for her father. Mrs. Chen had been worried about me since noticing all the official-looking visitors and wanted to check on my well-being. Her information confirmed my worst suspicions. Karen had indeed filed for guardianship, claiming I was suffering from cognitive decline and was unable to manage my financial affairs safely. The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, just 1 week after their intervention visit. They'd been moving forward with legal action while pretending to give me time to consider their suggestions. The guardianship petition, according to Mrs. Chen's grandson, painted a picture of an isolated, confused old man who was making poor financial decisions and might be vulnerable to scams or exploitation. The irony was staggering. The people actually exploiting me were seeking legal authority to protect me from exploitation. I spent Sunday afternoon calling Margaret Chen to report these new developments. Her anger was palpable even over the phone. The systematic nature of my family's actions, combined with the secret guardianship filing, elevated this from simple financial abuse to a coordinated attack on my legal rights and personal autonomy. Margaret explained that guardianship proceedings were designed to protect vulnerable adults, but they could also be weaponized by family members seeking to control an elderly person's assets. If successful, Karen would have legal authority over all my financial decisions, health care choices, and living arrangements. I would become a legal ward, stripped of the right to make my own decisions about my life and property. The timeline became clear. The intervention on my birthday hadn't been the beginning of their plan. It had been the final step before legal action. They'd spent months gathering information, establishing a pattern of concern about my competency, and preparing evidence to support their guardianship petition. The house sale pressure had been designed to make me appear confused and easily manipulated. Margaret's immediate concern was protecting my assets and legal standing before Friday's hearing. We scheduled an emergency Monday morning meeting to file counter-motions, gather evidence of my competency, and potentially pursue criminal charges for the theft and fraud we'd uncovered. That evening, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the evidence of my family's betrayal. Bank statements, insurance records, credit reports, and security logs painted a picture of systematic exploitation by the people who were supposed to love and protect me. The scope and sophistication of their operation suggested they'd been planning this for far longer than I'd realized. The phone rang 3 times during dinner. Karen, Mike, and Ashley each calling to check on my decision-making process. Their voices carried new undertones now that I understood their true motivations. What they thought was caring concern sounded like surveillance and pressure tactics. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone in my own family. The people I'd raised, supported, and loved had been treating me like a mark in some elaborate confidence scheme. They'd exploited my trust, my generosity, and my love to position themselves to steal everything I'd worked for over 7 decades of life. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed that age equated to helplessness, that modest living meant limited resources, and that their father would never fight back against his own children. Tomorrow morning, they were going to discover just how wrong they'd been about Robert Murphy. The war for my dignity, my autonomy, and my life savings was about to begin in earnest. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a declaration of war. I woke before dawn, dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn to funerals and graduations, and drove to Margaret Chen's law office with the systematic precision of a man who'd spent his life solving problems methodically. Margaret's office occupied the entire third floor of a downtown building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. Her staff moved with the efficient confidence of people who fought important battles every day. This wasn't the cozy family law practice Karen's attorney represented. This was serious legal artillery. The conference room table disappeared under the weight of documents I'd brought. Bank statements, investment records, property deeds, insurance policies, and evidence of the systematic theft and surveillance my family had conducted. Margaret's associates worked quietly in the background, organizing everything into what looked like a prosecutor's case file. Margaret's initial review of the guardianship petition filed by Karen revealed legal arguments so weak they bordered on fraudulent. The claim that I was cognitively impaired relied entirely on third-hand observations and assumptions. No medical records supported their assertions. No professional evaluations had been conducted. No actual evidence of incompetence existed beyond their own statements. Their description of my financial situation was equally fictional. They'd estimated my net worth at less than $50,000, based apparently on the modest house and careful spending habits they'd observed. The reality, $2.3 million in assets, managed through sophisticated investment strategies over 4 decades, would shock the family court judge who'd been led to believe he was protecting a struggling pensioner. The theft evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Bank records clearly showed unauthorized access to my accounts using stolen debit card information. The pattern of small, regular withdrawals designed to avoid detection demonstrated sophisticated criminal planning. Security footage from ATM locations would likely provide visual confirmation of the perpetrators. Margaret's strategy was elegant and devastating. We would file an immediate motion to dismiss the guardianship petition based on fraudulent claims and lack of evidence. Simultaneously, we would request criminal prosecution for financial elder abuse, identity theft, and fraud. Finally, we would seek civil damages for the stolen money, plus punitive awards for the intentional infliction of emotional distress. The investigation had uncovered additional crimes I hadn't yet discovered. Someone had been intercepting my mail, particularly financial statements and legal correspondence. The Postal Service investigation Margaret requested would likely reveal federal mail fraud charges in addition to state financial abuse allegations. The safety deposit box theft represented another serious felony. Bank security records showed exactly when Ashley had accessed the box, what she'd removed, and how she'd obtained the key. Her signature on the access forms would provide handwriting evidence for prosecution. The stolen documents she'd taken were still missing, suggesting ongoing criminal activity. Margaret's team had also discovered that Karen's attorney had been operating under false pretenses. His correspondence with the court described a family working together to help an incapacitated elderly man, when in fact He was representing people actively stealing from their victim. The ethical implications for his law license were severe, and Margaret planned to file bar complaints in addition to criminal referrals. The financial investigation revealed the full scope of my family's misconduct. They'd been systematically gathering information about my assets for over a year, conducting what amounted to corporate-level due diligence on their own father. The sophistication of their operation suggested they'd received professional guidance, possibly from financial advisors or attorneys who specialized in elder exploitation. My investment portfolio review took 2 hours and left Margaret's team visibly impressed. 47 years of disciplined investing had created a diversified portfolio that any financial professional would admire. The growth trajectory, risk management, and strategic rebalancing demonstrated financial sophistication that completely contradicted their claims of cognitive impairment. The medical evaluation Margaret arranged for Tuesday would provide professional confirmation of my mental competency. Dr. Sarah Williams specialized in geriatric psychology and had extensive experience evaluating cognitive function in older adults. Her assessment would create an official record of my mental capacity that would destroy Karen's guardianship petition. Margaret explained that elder financial abuse cases often involved family members who'd convinced themselves they were acting in their target's best interests. The rationalization process allowed them to justify theft and manipulation as helping someone who couldn't help themselves. My family had likely constructed an elaborate narrative that painted me as the victim they were rescuing rather than the victim they were creating. The counterattack would begin immediately with emergency motions filed that afternoon. The guardianship hearing scheduled for Friday would become a forum for exposing my family's crimes, rather than rubber-stamping their control over my assets. The element of surprise would be crucial. They expected to face a confused old man, represented by whatever public defender the court provided. Instead, they would face a well-prepared legal team with overwhelming evidence of their criminal behavior. The contrast between their assumptions and reality would be stark and devastating. Margaret's reputation in elder law meant the judge would take our allegations seriously from the moment we entered the courtroom. The civil lawsuit would follow the criminal referrals, seeking not just recovery of stolen funds, but substantial punitive damages for the emotional trauma they'd inflicted. The systematic nature of their abuse, combined with the violation of family trust, made this case particularly egregious. Juries didn't respond kindly to adult children who stole from their elderly parents. That afternoon, I watched Margaret's team file motion after motion with the courthouse. Emergency requests for asset protection, criminal referrals to the district attorney's office, bar complaints against opposing counsel, and comprehensive documentation of my family's systematic abuse. The legal system that my children had tried to manipulate against me was now being mobilized for my protection. The phone calls started before dinner. Karen's voice carried new undertones of panic when she asked if I'd made any decisions about the house. Mike's text messages became more frequent and urgent, suggesting we meet to discuss the misunderstandings that might be developing. Ashley's communication stopped entirely, which suggested someone had warned her about potential legal consequences. I realized they'd expected this process to unfold quietly and privately, with minimal outside scrutiny of their actions. The involvement of serious legal representation and potential criminal prosecution had introduced complications they hadn't anticipated. Their confidence was beginning to crack under the pressure of actual accountability. That evening, I called my investment advisor to discuss additional asset protection strategies. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using the very wealth my family wanted to steal to fund my defense against their theft. The careful financial planning they'd dismissed as the confused efforts of a declining mind was now generating the resources necessary to protect my autonomy and dignity. For the first time in months, I felt something approaching peace about my family situation. The powerlessness and confusion I'd experienced during their intervention had been replaced by clarity and determination. They'd declared war on my independence. Now they would face the consequences of that declaration. Friday's hearing would mark the end of their criminal enterprise and the beginning of their accountability. The secret millionaire they'd tried to exploit was about to reveal just how expensive their greed would prove to be. Tuesday morning's competency evaluation with Dr. Williams felt like taking a final exam for my own autonomy. Her office was warm and professional, designed to put elderly clients at ease while conducting thorough assessments of their cognitive abilities. I'd never been more motivated to demonstrate mental sharpness in my entire life. Dr. Williams's evaluation was comprehensive and rigorous. Memory tests, problem-solving exercises, financial comprehension questions, and detailed discussions about my life history and current circumstances. She asked about my investment strategy, my understanding of legal proceedings, and my awareness of the family situation I was facing. The results were unambiguous and powerful. My cognitive function tested well above average for my age group, with particular strength in areas related to financial reasoning and long-term planning. Dr. Williams noted my excellent memory for detail, sophisticated understanding of complex concepts, and clear awareness of my legal rights and options. Her written report would destroy any claim that I was mentally incapacitated. The evaluation documented not just normal cognitive function, but exceptional mental acuity for someone of any age. Her professional opinion stated clearly that I possessed full capacity to make informed decisions about my finances, health care, and living arrangements. While Dr. Williams completed her assessment, Margaret's investigation had uncovered additional evidence of my family's criminal enterprise. The postal inspector's preliminary report confirmed systematic mail theft stretching back over 6 months. Someone had been intercepting bank statements, investment reports, and legal correspondence with sophisticated timing that suggested inside knowledge of my financial schedule. The district attorney's office had opened a formal investigation into the financial abuse allegations. Detective Rodriguez, who specialized in elder crimes, reviewed our evidence and determined that we had probable cause for multiple felony charges. The systematic nature of the theft, combined with the fraudulent guardianship petition, suggested a level of criminal sophistication that demanded serious prosecution. Margaret's team had also discovered that my family's attorney had a history of questionable elder law cases. 3 previous guardianship proceedings he'd handled had involved similar patterns of family members seeking control over elderly relatives' assets based on disputed competency claims. The Bar Association was now investigating whether his practice specialized in facilitating elder financial abuse. Wednesday brought an unexpected development that changed everything. Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor, called to report that she'd overheard Karen and Mike discussing their plans during a visit to my house the previous week. Their conversation had revealed details about the guardianship strategy that I found both shocking and illuminating. According to Mrs. Patterson, Karen had been coordinating with a care facility that specialized in housing elderly people under guardianship arrangements. The facility's business model involved taking control of residents' assets to pay for expensive care while providing minimal services. My children had essentially arranged to have me imprisoned in a facility that would systematically drain my wealth while keeping me isolated from outside contact. The care facility investigation revealed a pattern of elder abuse that extended far beyond my family's individual crimes. State regulators had been investigating the facility for financial exploitation, inadequate care, and suspicious death rates among residents. My children had partnered with a criminal enterprise that preyed on vulnerable elderly people under the guise of providing professional care. Margaret immediately filed additional motions seeking emergency injunctions against both my family and the care facility. The scope of the criminal conspiracy had expanded beyond simple theft to include potential kidnapping, false imprisonment, and participation in an ongoing criminal enterprise. The legal stakes had escalated dramatically. Thursday's preparation for Friday's hearing felt like preparing for the most important presentation of my life. Margaret's team had assembled a comprehensive case that would not only defend against the guardianship petition, but expose the full scope of my family's criminal behavior. The evidence filled 3 bankers' boxes and painted a picture of systematic elder abuse that shocked even experienced elder law attorneys. The financial documentation alone was devastating. Bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals, credit reports revealing unauthorized inquiries, insurance records documenting fraudulent contacts, and investment statements proving sophisticated asset management that contradicted every claim of mental incapacity. The contrast between my actual financial sophistication and their claims of incompetence was stark and undeniable. Dr. Williams's competency evaluation provided the scientific foundation for our defense. Her detailed assessment documented cognitive abilities that would make someone half my age envious. The psychological testing revealed not just normal mental function, but exceptional capability in areas directly relevant to financial decision-making and self-care. The criminal evidence went beyond financial theft to include identity fraud, mail theft, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. Federal postal inspectors had joined the investigation, adding federal charges to the state criminal referrals. My family's small-time theft had escalated into a federal criminal investigation with serious prison time potential. Margaret's strategy for Friday's hearing was designed to create maximum impact through systematic revelation of evidence. We would begin with my obvious mental competency, progress through the financial abuse evidence, and conclude with the criminal conspiracy involving the care facility. By the end of our presentation, the judge would understand that he wasn't reviewing a standard guardianship case, but rather a criminal enterprise masquerading as family concern. The media implications were significant. Elder abuse cases involving sophisticated criminal conspiracies attracted news attention, particularly when they involved middle-class families and professional care facilities. Margaret had contacted investigative reporters who specialized in elder care fraud, and they were preparing stories that would expose the broader pattern of abuse beyond my individual case. Thursday evening, I received the last family phone call I expected to receive for a long time. Karen's voice carried desperation and confusion as she asked about rumors she'd heard regarding criminal investigations and legal complications. Her attorney had apparently warned her about potential problems with their guardianship strategy, though he hadn't revealed the full scope of the criminal exposure they were facing. I listened to her questions with new understanding of her motivations and methods. Every expression of concern was calculated manipulation. Every offer of help came with strings attached. Every interaction had been designed to gather information or establish evidence of my supposed incompetence. The daughter I'd raised had become a stranger who saw me as an obstacle to her financial goals. Mike's text messages throughout the week had grown increasingly frantic, as he apparently sensed that their plans were unraveling. His suggestions for family meetings and discussions about misunderstandings revealed his growing awareness that their criminal activity had been discovered. The confident manipulator who'd photographed my prescription bottles had been replaced by someone who understood he was facing serious legal consequences. Ashley's complete silence since Monday suggested she'd received legal advice about her exposure for the safety deposit box theft. Her systematic removal of important documents had left physical evidence that would be difficult to dispute in court. The granddaughter who dismissed my technological competence had apparently learned enough about criminal law to understand the wisdom of exercising her Fifth Amendment rights. Friday morning would mark the end of my secret millionaire status and the beginning of my family's public accountability. The wealth I'd accumulated through decades of careful planning would be revealed in a courtroom, along with the crimes my children had committed trying to steal it. The guardianship hearing they'd expected to be a formality would instead become the forum for exposing one of the most sophisticated elder abuse schemes the local courts had seen. Margaret's confidence in our case was absolute, and my confidence in Margaret was complete. After 74 years of building wealth, raising children, and maintaining family relationships, I was finally ready to fight for my dignity, my autonomy, and my right to control my own life. The secret was about to be revealed, and the consequences would change everything. Friday morning arrived with the weight of decades pressing down on my shoulders. I put on my best suit, the navy blue one I'd bought for my wife's funeral 15 years ago, and drove to the courthouse with Margaret Chen beside me. The building's imposing stone facade seemed appropriate for what was about to unfold. The final battle for my independence and dignity. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but the atmosphere felt charged with tension. Karen sat with her attorney at one table, her face showing the strain of a week spent realizing her carefully planned operation was falling apart. Mike paced nervously near the back, checking his phone repeatedly as if expecting news that might change the trajectory of this disaster. Ashley was nowhere to be seen, apparently having taken her attorney's advice about avoiding further legal exposure. Judge Patricia Morrison entered with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd seen every variation of family dysfunction over 20 years on the bench. Her preliminary review of the case files had already raised her suspicions. Margaret's emergency motions had alerted her that this guardianship petition involved far more than the simple competency question originally presented. Karen's attorney began with the standard arguments about my supposed cognitive decline and need for protective oversight. His presentation felt rehearsed, but increasingly hollow, as he struggled to present evidence that didn't exist. Every claim about my mental incapacity relied on assumptions rather than actual observation, speculation rather than medical evidence. The contrast became apparent immediately when Margaret began our response. Dr. Williams's competency evaluation was read into the record, documenting cognitive abilities that impressed even the court reporter. The detailed psychological assessment destroyed every assumption my family had made about my mental capacity and decision-making abilities. Margaret's presentation of my financial records created visible shock in the courtroom. 47 years of investment statements, portfolio growth charts, and sophisticated asset management decisions painted a picture of financial acumen that few professional investors could match. The millionaire status Karen's petition had completely overlooked changed the entire context of the guardianship request. The judge's questions became increasingly pointed as she understood the implications of what was being revealed. If I possessed both mental competency and substantial financial sophistication, what was the real motivation behind my family's guardianship petition? Margaret's answer came in the form of bank records documenting systematic theft and financial exploitation. The criminal evidence presentation felt like watching a prosecutor methodically build a case against defendants who were sitting in the same courtroom. Unauthorized bank withdrawals, stolen mail, fraudulent identity use, and conspiracy with a criminal care facility created a pattern of elder abuse that went far beyond simple family disagreement about my living arrangements. Karen's attorney attempted damage control as the scope of his client's criminal behavior became clear. His objections and procedural motions couldn't address the fundamental problem: overwhelming evidence that his clients had been systematically stealing from the person they claimed to be protecting. His professional reputation was crumbling along with their legal case. The most devastating moment came when Margaret presented evidence about the care facility partnership. Judge Morrison's expression shifted from skeptical attention to outright anger as she learned about the systematic exploitation operation my family had arranged. The revelation that they'd planned to have me imprisoned in a facility known for abusing elderly residents under guardianship exposed the true scope of their criminal intent. Detective Rodriguez testified about the ongoing criminal investigation, confirming that multiple felony charges were being prepared against my family members. Federal postal inspectors had joined the investigation, adding federal crimes to the state charges. The systematic nature of their operation had attracted serious law enforcement attention that would result in significant prison time. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. The guardianship petition was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. Karen was ordered to immediately return all documents stolen from my safety deposit box. All family members were prohibited from contacting me or attempting to access my financial accounts. The court would refer the case to prosecutors for immediate criminal action. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Her experience with elder abuse cases had taught her that financial exploitation often continued even after legal intervention. She issued protective orders requiring my family to stay away from my home, my bank, and my medical providers. Any violation would result in immediate arrest and additional criminal charges. The media presence in the courtroom had grown throughout the morning as word spread about the sophisticated elder abuse scheme being exposed. Reporters who specialized in elder care fraud recognized this case as an example of a growing problem. Adult children systematically exploiting elderly parents while claiming to provide protection and care. Margaret's press conference after the hearing focused on the broader implications of my case. Elder financial abuse was a serious crime that destroyed families and devastated victims, but it was often difficult to prosecute because victims were reluctant to report family members. My willingness to fight back would hopefully encourage other elderly people to seek help when facing similar exploitation. The civil lawsuit Margaret filed that afternoon sought not just recovery of stolen funds, but substantial punitive damages for the emotional trauma and violation of trust my family had inflicted. The systematic nature of their abuse, combined with the sophisticated criminal conspiracy they'd developed, made this case particularly egregious in legal terms. The financial impact on my family would be severe and lasting. Criminal prosecution would result in felony convictions that would affect their employment, housing, and professional licensing. Civil judgments would require them to pay damages that could bankrupt them. Their reputations in the community would be permanently damaged by the public exposure of their crimes. The investigation continued beyond Friday's hearing. Federal agents were examining the care facility's operations and other suspicious guardianship cases involving the same attorney. My family's criminal enterprise had connected them to a broader network of elder abuse that law enforcement was determined to dismantle completely. That evening, I sat in my kitchen reviewing the documents Margaret had given me about asset protection and estate planning. The wealth I'd spent decades accumulating would now be protected by legal structures designed to prevent future exploitation. The family I'd planned to leave my fortune to had disqualified themselves through their own greed and criminal behavior. The phone remained silent for the first time in weeks. No calls from Karen asking about my decision-making progress. No texts from Mike offering helpful suggestions about my living arrangements. No contact from Ashley about family obligations or generational wisdom. The peace felt strange but welcome after months of manipulation and pressure. My reflection on the day's events brought mixed emotions. Victory over people who'd tried to steal my autonomy and wealth, but sadness about the family relationships that had been permanently destroyed. Pride in standing up for myself, but grief over the necessity of fighting my own children in court. The secret millionaire status that had protected my wealth for so long was now public record, but the revelation had served its purpose. My financial success had provided the resources necessary to defend against my family's criminal enterprise. The careful planning they'd dismissed as the confused efforts of a declining mind had generated the evidence needed to expose their crimes. Justice had been served, but the cost had been everything I'd valued about family loyalty and unconditional love. The children I'd raised and supported had chosen greed over gratitude, manipulation over respect, and criminal exploitation over family responsibility. Their choices had consequences that would affect them for the rest of their lives. Friday night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that my independence was secure, my assets were protected, and my dignity had been restored. The war for my autonomy was over, and I had won completely. The weeks following the court hearing brought a strange mixture of relief and loneliness that I hadn't anticipated. My house felt different now, peaceful but empty, secure but isolated. The constant tension of family manipulation had been replaced by the quieter challenge of rebuilding a life without the relationships that had defined my identity for decades. Margaret's legal team continued working on the broader implications of my case. The criminal prosecution moved forward with efficiency that reflected the strength of our evidence. Karen faced charges for financial elder abuse, identity theft, and conspiracy. Mike was charged with bank fraud and theft. Ashley's safety deposit box crime had resulted in federal charges that carried serious prison time. The care facility investigation had expanded into a comprehensive examination of elder abuse throughout the state. My case had provided prosecutors with a clear example of how legitimate guardianship proceedings could be weaponized to facilitate systematic exploitation. The facility's business model of imprisoning elderly people under fraudulent guardianships was being dismantled through coordinated law enforcement action. Dr. Williams had referred me to a counselor who specialized in family trauma and elder abuse recovery. The sessions were difficult but necessary, helping me process the betrayal and grief of losing my children to their own criminal behavior. Understanding that their actions reflected their character rather than my failures as a father provided some comfort, though the pain remained sharp and persistent. The financial reorganization of my assets took several weeks and required decisions I'd never expected to face. Estate planning documents that had designated my children as beneficiaries needed complete revision. Investment strategies that had focused on leaving wealth to family required adjustment toward supporting causes and organizations that reflected my values rather than my bloodline. Margaret introduced me to other elder abuse survivors through a support group that met weekly at the community center. Listening to their stories revealed patterns similar to my own experience. Adult children who'd exploited trust and family bonds for financial gain, then justified their crimes as helping confused elderly parents. The commonality of these experiences was both comforting and deeply disturbing. The media attention surrounding my case brought unexpected contacts from people I hadn't heard from in years. Former co-workers from the factory expressed amazement at my financial success and pride in my willingness to fight back against family exploitation. High school classmates shared their own experiences with difficult adult children and expressed admiration for my courage in pursuing criminal prosecution. My investment advisor helped me develop a new financial strategy that balanced traditional wealth preservation with philanthropic giving that would provide meaning and purpose to my remaining years. The money I'd accumulated through decades of careful planning would now support causes I cared about, rather than funding the criminal enterprises my family had developed. The loneliness was the most challenging aspect of my new independence. 40 years of family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and regular contact with children and grandchildren had been replaced by silence and isolation. The relationships I'd valued most had been revealed as elaborate manipulations designed to facilitate theft and exploitation. But new relationships began developing organically as I engaged more actively with my community. Volunteering at the Literacy Center introduced me to people who valued education and social contribution over financial status. Teaching basic financial planning to younger adults provided opportunities to share my expertise while building meaningful connections based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. The church I'd attended sporadically for years became a source of social connection and spiritual comfort. Many congregation members had faced similar family challenges and provided both practical advice and emotional support. The pastor's counseling sessions helped me process the grief of losing family relationships while maintaining hope for future healing and reconciliation. My neighbor relationships deepened as people learned about my situation and offered support. Mrs. Patterson became a close friend who checked on me regularly and included me in neighborhood gatherings. The young couple next door invited me for dinner weekly and appreciated my willingness to share life wisdom and practical advice about home maintenance and financial planning. The investigation into my family's crimes continued producing evidence of additional exploitation I hadn't previously discovered. They'd apparently been planning their operation for over 2 years, researching elder law, studying my financial habits, and developing strategies for gaining control of my assets. The sophistication of their criminal enterprise suggested they'd received professional guidance from others experienced in elder exploitation. Margaret's civil lawsuit against my family was producing results that went beyond financial recovery. Discovery proceedings revealed the full scope of their planning and coordination, providing evidence that could be used to prosecute other people who'd assisted their criminal enterprise. The attorney who'd filed the fraudulent guardianship petition was facing disbarment and potential criminal charges for his role in the conspiracy. The care facility that had been prepared to imprison me was shut down by state regulators after the investigation revealed systematic abuse of elderly residents. Several staff members faced criminal charges for their roles in the exploitation operation. My case had helped expose a network of elder abuse that had victimized dozens of families throughout the region. Spring brought new energy and optimism to my daily routine. Gardening projects that had been neglected during months of family stress provided physical activity and emotional satisfaction. The vegetable garden I'd planned to abandon when considering assisted living became a source of pride and connection to the neighborhood children who loved watching plants grow and learning about traditional farming techniques. Travel plans that had been postponed due to family pressure were revived with enthusiasm. The financial security I'd built over decades was finally being used for my own enjoyment rather than being hoarded against uncertain family demands. A week-long trip to visit Civil War battlefields I'd wanted to see for years provided historical education and personal satisfaction that reminded me why I'd worked so hard to build financial independence. The reading group at the library became a weekly highlight that provided intellectual stimulation and social interaction with people who valued learning and discussion. My factory background didn't matter to group members who appreciated thoughtful analysis and different perspectives on literature and current events. The respect I received was based on my contributions to conversations rather than my financial status or family relationships. Financial education workshops at the Senior Center provided opportunities to share the investment knowledge I'd accumulated over 47 years. Teaching other elderly people about basic financial planning and protection against scams felt like meaningful contribution to community welfare. The appreciation expressed by people who learned from my experience provided purpose and satisfaction that family relationships had never offered. The criminal trials scheduled for fall would provide final closure to the legal aspects of my family's betrayal. Testifying against my own children would be emotionally difficult, but the evidence was so overwhelming that their convictions were virtually certain. The justice system that they'd tried to manipulate against me had become the mechanism for holding them accountable for their crimes. Estate planning revisions were nearly complete, redirecting my wealth toward charitable organizations and educational institutions that would use the money to help people rather than enabling criminal behavior. The satisfaction of knowing my life's work would support positive causes provided meaning that leaving money to ungrateful family members had never offered. The secret millionaire identity that had protected my wealth for so long was no longer necessary. My financial success was now public knowledge, but it had served its purpose by providing the resources needed to defend against family exploitation. The modest lifestyle I'd maintained would continue by choice rather than deception, reflecting values rather than strategy. Summer evenings on my front porch brought peaceful reflection on the journey from victim to survivor, to someone building a meaningful life based on authentic relationships and personal values. The family that had defined my identity for decades was gone, but the independence and dignity I'd fought to preserve provided the foundation for whatever chapters remained in my story. The children I'd raised were facing the consequences of their choices, but those consequences reflected justice rather than revenge. Their criminal behavior had earned them the legal penalties they would serve, just as my decades of hard work had earned me the right to control my own life and resources. At 74, I was learning that it was never too late to start over, to build new relationships based on mutual respect, and to find purpose and meaning that didn't depend on family approval or artificial manipulation. The secret millionaire had become simply Robert Murphy, a man who'd fought for his dignity and won the right to live authentically in his remaining years. 6 months after the trial, I was settling into the rhythm of my new life when the phone rang on a Tuesday morning. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't answer. Too many reporters and curiosity seekers had contacted me since the court case became public. But something made me pick up the receiver, and the voice I heard changed everything I thought I knew about my situation. Ashley's voice was barely recognizable, thick with tears, and stripped of the entitled confidence I remembered from our last conversation. She was calling from a rehab facility in Arizona, she said, where she'd been for the past 3 months dealing with addiction issues that had apparently contributed to her participation in the family's criminal enterprise. Her request was simple, but emotionally complex. She wanted to meet with me, not to ask for money or forgiveness, but to take responsibility for her actions and share information about the family situation that I didn't yet understand. The conversation lasted only 5 minutes, but it left me shaken in ways I hadn't expected. Margaret's advice was cautious but supportive when I called to discuss Ashley's contact. The criminal cases were concluded, civil judgments had been satisfied, and protective orders were still in place, but they didn't prevent voluntary contact if I chose to allow it. The decision was entirely mine, with no legal implications regardless of what I chose. Dr. Williams helped me process the emotional complexity of Ashley's unexpected call during our next counseling session. My granddaughter's apparent recognition of her wrongdoing represented the first acknowledgement of responsibility from any family member. But it also opened wounds I'd been working to heal through acceptance and distance. The meeting I ultimately agreed to took place at Margaret's office, with professional supervision to ensure my emotional and legal protection. Ashley arrived looking years older than the entitled college student who'd dismissed my opinions 6 months earlier. Her appearance reflected both the physical toll of addiction and the emotional weight of acknowledging her crimes. Her story revealed family dynamics I hadn't understood during the crisis. Karen's financial pressures had been far more severe than I'd realized, including gambling debts that threatened her home and employment. Mike's business failures had created desperate circumstances that made my modest wealth look like a solution to problems I'd never been told about. More shocking was Ashley's revelation that their attorney had approached them, not the other way around. His practice specialized in identifying vulnerable elderly people with assets, then recruiting family members to participate in exploitation schemes that enriched both the families and his legal practice. My children hadn't originated their criminal plan. They'd been recruited into an existing operation. The care facility arrangement had been even more sinister than the court proceedings had revealed. Residents who entered under guardianship typically died within 18 months, under circumstances that avoided medical scrutiny. Their assets were systematically drained during brief stays that ended conveniently before family members could investigate suspicious financial activity. Ashley's cooperation with federal investigators had provided evidence that led to additional arrests and prosecutions throughout the state. Her willingness to testify against the attorney and care facility operators had resulted in substantial sentences for people who'd exploited dozens of elderly victims. Her courage in exposing the broader criminal network had helped protect other families from similar exploitation. The addiction that had contributed to her poor judgment had begun during her sophomore year of college, when financial pressures and academic stress had led to prescription drug abuse that escalated over several years. Her participation in the family's criminal enterprise had been motivated partly by drug-related debts that made her vulnerable to manipulation by the other participants. Her recovery program had included extensive counseling about the impact of her actions on victims, particularly elderly family members who'd trusted her. The guilt and shame she carried were evident in every word as she described understanding, for the first time, how her crimes had affected me emotionally beyond the financial damage. The conversation was difficult and painful, but it provided closure I hadn't realized I needed. Ashley's acknowledgement of responsibility, her detailed explanation of the broader criminal conspiracy, and her visible remorse offered something her mother and uncle had never provided: genuine recognition that their actions had been wrong and harmful. Margaret's assessment after the meeting was that Ashley's information was credible, and her remorse appeared genuine, but that I should proceed cautiously with any relationship rebuilding. People in early recovery often promised changes they couldn't sustain, and my emotional protection remained the highest priority regardless of Ashley's apparent transformation. The federal investigation Ashley's cooperation had assisted was producing results that extended far beyond my individual case. The attorney who'd recruited my family was facing federal charges for mail fraud, conspiracy, and operating a criminal enterprise. His conviction would likely result in decades in federal prison and complete disbarment. Other families who'd been victimized by the same network were coming forward with similar stories. Elderly people who'd been isolated in guardianship arrangements had their assets systematically stolen, or had died under suspicious circumstances in the care facility. My willingness to fight back had opened a door for other victims to seek justice. The media attention surrounding the expanded investigation brought national focus to elder abuse as a growing criminal enterprise. My case had become a symbol of successful resistance to family exploitation, but also an example of how sophisticated these criminal operations had become. Interview requests came from national news programs interested in the broader implications of systematic elder abuse. Ashley's request for a second meeting came 3 weeks later, this time asking if she could visit my home to see if anything remained of the family relationships that had existed before the criminal conspiracy destroyed everything. The conversation would be difficult, but I found myself curious about whether genuine healing was possible after such devastating betrayal. The decision to allow Ashley into my home felt like the biggest risk I'd taken since deciding to fight the guardianship petition. Trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be rebuilt quickly or easily. But her cooperation with law enforcement and apparent commitment to recovery suggested she might be the only family member capable of genuine accountability. The visit was scheduled for the following weekend, with Margaret's team on standby and clear boundaries about duration and topics of conversation. Ashley would have 2 hours to share whatever she wanted to communicate, but no expectation of forgiveness or relationship restoration. The meeting would provide information and closure, nothing more. Dr. Williams helped me prepare emotionally for a conversation that could either provide healing or reopen wounds that had been slowly mending. Ashley's apparent remorse might be genuine, but it might also be another manipulation designed to achieve goals I couldn't yet understand. My emotional protection required maintaining skepticism while remaining open to the possibility of authentic accountability. The criminal conspiracy that had targeted me was larger and more sophisticated than I'd initially understood, but it was also being systematically dismantled through law enforcement action that my case had initiated. Justice was being served not just for my individual situation, but for dozens of other elderly victims who'd suffered similar exploitation. My new life, built on authentic relationships and meaningful activities, was strong enough to handle whatever revelations or requests Ashley might bring. The independence and dignity I'd fought to preserve provided the foundation for engaging with family members from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. Whether Ashley's apparent transformation was genuine or temporary, the conversation would provide information that might help me understand how my family had been drawn into criminal behavior and whether any possibility existed for future relationship based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The secret millionaire who'd hidden his wealth to protect it from family manipulation was ready to hear whatever truth his granddaughter wanted to share, secure in the knowledge that his assets, his autonomy, and his dignity were now permanently protected from exploitation. Ashley arrived at my house that Saturday morning, carrying a box of documents and wearing the nervous expression of someone about to confess secrets that had been weighing on her soul for months. I made coffee while she arranged papers on my kitchen table, the same table where Karen had spread her guardianship documents 7 months earlier in what felt like a different lifetime. The documents Ashley brought told a story of family financial desperation and criminal recruitment that was far more complex than I'd understood during the crisis. Bank statements showed that Karen had been struggling with gambling debts that threatened to destroy her life months before they'd approached me about guardianship. Credit reports revealed that Mike's business failures had left him facing bankruptcy and potential foreclosure. Ashley's financial records showed student loan debt that exceeded $80,000, combined with credit card balances from drug purchases that had spiraled beyond her ability to manage. The three of them had been drowning financially when the attorney who specialized in elder exploitation had identified them as potential recruits for targeting me. The attorney's recruitment process had been sophisticated and gradual, beginning with casual conversations about family financial planning and elder care responsibilities. He'd gradually introduced concepts about guardianship as a tool for protecting elderly family members, then provided specific guidance about how to document concerns about my competency and financial management. Most disturbing was learning that the attorney had been monitoring my financial activity for over a year before approaching my family. Credit reporting services had provided him with detailed information about my assets, spending patterns, and investment activity. His practice specialized in identifying elderly people with substantial assets but modest lifestyles who might be vulnerable to family exploitation. Ashley's participation had begun when she'd needed bail money after a drug-related arrest that I'd never been told about. The attorney had arranged her release in exchange for her cooperation in gathering information about my financial situation and personal routines. Her visits to my safety deposit box had been specifically directed by someone who knew exactly what documents would be needed for the guardianship proceeding. The care facility partnership was even more sinister than the court proceedings had revealed. Residents who entered under guardianship were systematically isolated from outside contact, over-medicated to ensure compliance, and provided minimal actual care, while their assets were drained through inflated billing and fraudulent charges. The facility's business model depended on elderly people dying before family members could investigate financial irregularities. Ashley's cooperation with federal investigators had required her to wear recording devices during conversations with the attorney and care facility operators, providing evidence that led to conspiracy charges against 15 people throughout the state. Her willingness to risk her own safety to expose the criminal network had helped protect other elderly people from similar exploitation. The recovery program she'd completed in Arizona had included extensive education about the impact of financial elder abuse on victims and families. Her counseling had focused not just on addiction recovery, but on understanding how her actions had violated family trust and inflicted emotional trauma that extended far beyond the financial damage. Her request wasn't for forgiveness, which she understood might never be possible, but for the opportunity to rebuild some form of relationship based on honesty and accountability. She wanted to earn the right to be my granddaughter again, not through manipulation or false promises, but through sustained demonstration of changed behavior and genuine respect. The conversation was emotionally exhausting but provided closure I hadn't realized I needed. Understanding that my family had been recruited into criminal behavior rather than originating it themselves didn't excuse their actions, but it provided context that helped me process the betrayal more completely. They'd made terrible choices, but they'd also been manipulated by professionals who specialized in exploiting both elderly victims and desperate family members. Ashley's visible remorse and detailed accountability were unlike anything I'd received from Karen or Mike, who'd maintained their innocence throughout the criminal proceedings despite overwhelming evidence of their guilt. Her willingness to accept responsibility and work toward making amends represented the first genuine acknowledgement that their actions had been harmful and wrong. Margaret's assessment of Ashley's credibility remained cautious, but increasingly positive as weeks passed, without any requests for money or assistance. Her cooperation with law enforcement had continued beyond her required testimony, providing additional information that led to more arrests and prosecutions. Her commitment to recovery appeared genuine and sustained. Dr. Williams helped me process the complex emotions that Ashley's accountability had triggered. Relief that at least one family member recognized the harm they'd caused, grief for the relationships that had been destroyed by criminal behavior, and cautious hope that some form of family connection might eventually be rebuilt on healthier foundations. The boundaries I established for any future relationship with Ashley were clear and non-negotiable. No financial assistance of any kind, no involvement in my financial planning or estate decisions, and no assumption that accountability alone would restore the trust that had been violated. Any relationship would need to be earned gradually through sustained demonstration of respect and honesty. Ashley's response to these boundaries was acceptance and gratitude, that I was willing to consider any relationship at all. Her recovery counselors had prepared her to expect permanent estrangement as a natural consequence of her actions. The possibility of rebuilding even limited family connection represented more than she'd hoped for when she'd decided to cooperate with law enforcement. The federal investigation Ashley had assisted was producing results that extended nationwide. The attorney who'd recruited my family was part of a larger network that had systematically targeted elderly people in multiple states. FBI investigations were uncovering what appeared to be a coordinated criminal enterprise that had stolen millions from elderly victims nationwide. My case had become a model for how elderly people could successfully resist family exploitation when they had the resources and determination to fight back. Legal professionals throughout the country were studying Margaret's strategy for defending against fraudulent guardianship petitions while simultaneously pursuing criminal prosecution of the perpetrators. The media attention had brought speaking opportunities that allowed me to share my experience with other elderly people and their families. Educational presentations at senior centers and community groups provided platforms for discussing elder abuse recognition and prevention. My story helped illustrate that financial sophistication and strong legal representation could overcome even sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Estate planning revisions had been completed, redirecting my wealth toward charitable organizations and educational institutions that reflected my values rather than family obligations. The satisfaction of knowing my life's work would support positive causes provided meaning that leaving money to ungrateful family members had never offered. The relationship with Ashley that slowly developed over subsequent months was different from anything I'd experienced with my family before. Built on honesty rather than manipulation, respect rather than entitlement, and genuine care rather than financial interest. Her sobriety and commitment to making amends created space for authentic connection that transcended the criminal history we were both working to overcome. Recovery from family betrayal proved to be a longer process than recovery from financial theft. The money had been returned through criminal restitution and civil judgments, but the emotional damage required ongoing work to process and heal. Ashley's accountability helped, but it couldn't undo the trauma of discovering that the people I'd loved most had been systematically exploiting my trust and planning to imprison me. The community relationships I'd built provided support and meaning that family relationships had never offered. Based on mutual respect and shared interests rather than obligation and manipulation, these connections sustained me through difficult days and enhanced the joy of positive experiences. The chosen family I'd created was healthier than the biological family I'd lost. At 75, I was learning that family could be defined by behavior rather than blood, that trust could be rebuilt after betrayal if the effort was genuine and sustained, and that it was never too late to build meaningful relationships based on authentic values rather than artificial obligations. The secret millionaire identity that had once protected my wealth was no longer necessary, but the financial independence it had provided remained the foundation for making choices based on what was right rather than what was convenient or expected. My money had bought me the freedom to demand respect, seek justice, and build a life that reflected my values rather than other people's expectations. Ashley's transformation from entitled criminal to accountable family member provided hope that people could change, relationships could heal, and justice could be tempered with mercy when the effort to make amends was genuine and sustained. The granddaughter I was cautiously learning to trust again bore little resemblance to the young woman who'd stolen from my safety deposit box. But perhaps that was exactly the kind of change that made redemption possible. I'm writing this on my 77th birthday. Sitting in the sunroom I added to my house 2 years ago, with money I once would have hoarded against uncertain family demands. The view overlooks the garden where Ashley and I work together most Saturday mornings, growing vegetables we share with neighbors, and discussing life lessons that span 3 generations of hard-won wisdom. The house that my family once pressured me to sell has become a gathering place for the community relationships that sustain my days. The literacy volunteers I work with meet here monthly to plan tutoring programs. The investment club I founded for senior citizens uses my dining room for educational sessions about financial planning and scam protection. The book discussion group rotates through members' homes, but they always request extra meetings here because of the comfortable seating and excellent coffee. Ashley completed her degree in social work last spring and now works with elder abuse victims through the county prosecutor's office. Her personal experience with both addiction and family crime provides credibility with clients who might otherwise resist outside assistance. Her cooperation with law enforcement led to 17 convictions for elder abuse throughout the region, protecting dozens of families from exploitation similar to what we experienced. The relationship we've rebuilt over 3 years bears no resemblance to the entitled granddaughter dynamic that existed before the criminal conspiracy destroyed our family. Built on mutual respect, honest communication, and shared commitment to helping other people, our connection provides meaning that superficial family gatherings never offered. She calls me Grandpa now, as a title of honor earned through respect rather than genetic inheritance claimed through entitlement. Karen and Mike were released from prison last year after serving 18 months for their financial crimes. Neither has attempted to contact me, apparently understanding that accountability requires more than simply completing their court-ordered sentences. The federal investigation Ashley assisted produced convictions for 37 people across 12 states who'd participated in systematic elder abuse networks. The attorney who recruited my family was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The care facility where they'd planned to imprison me was permanently closed, and its operators received sentences ranging from 10 to 15 years. My case became part of law school curriculum nationwide as an example of successful resistance to family exploitation through preparation, legal representation, and willingness to pursue criminal prosecution despite emotional difficulty. Elder law attorneys study Margaret's strategy for combining civil and criminal remedies to protect victims while holding perpetrators accountable. The speaking engagements that followed the media attention have evolved into a consulting practice that helps other elderly people recognize and resist family exploitation. Working with Margaret's firm, I provide education and support to elder abuse victims who need both practical guidance and emotional encouragement from someone who's survived similar betrayal and rebuilt a meaningful life. The Secret Millionaire story has been featured in documentaries, magazine articles, and educational materials about financial elder abuse. The irony that modest living and careful spending habits made me appear vulnerable to exploitation while actually providing the resources needed to defend against it illustrates how assumptions about elderly people can be both wrong and dangerous. My investment portfolio has continued growing despite the money spent on legal fees and the substantial charitable giving that now provides annual satisfaction greater than any family gathering ever offered. Financial independence remains the foundation for making choices based on principles rather than pressure, values rather than expectations. The estate planning that redirects my wealth toward charitable causes has been refined to include funding for elder abuse education and victim assistance programs. Ashley will receive enough to complete her education and establish her career, but the bulk of my assets will support causes that help other people rather than enabling family members who haven't earned the privilege of inheriting wealth they didn't work to create. The loneliness that followed the destruction of toxic family relationships has been replaced by social connections based on shared interests and mutual respect. Bridge games on Tuesday evenings, volunteer work on Thursday mornings, church activities on Sundays, and informal dinners with neighbors throughout the week provide more genuine companionship than family obligations ever offered. My health remains good enough to travel, learn new things, and contribute meaningfully to community activities. The stress reduction that followed elimination of family manipulation has improved both my physical well-being and mental clarity. Freedom from constant pressure to provide financial assistance or submit to controlling behavior has enhanced every aspect of my daily life. The factory worker who saved $50 a month starting in 1977 never imagined that careful investing would create wealth sufficient to fund legal battles, support meaningful causes, and provide security for whatever challenges might arise in remaining years. The discipline that created financial independence also provided the determination necessary to fight for dignity and autonomy when family members tried to steal both. Dr. Williams continues providing counseling that helps me process the complex emotions of rebuilding life after family betrayal. Recovery from elder abuse requires ongoing work to maintain boundaries, trust appropriate people, and find meaning in relationships that respect rather than exploit accumulated wisdom and experience. Margaret Chen has become more than my attorney. She's become a close friend whose expertise in elder law protects not just my legal interests, but also my emotional well-being. Her firm has handled dozens of similar cases since mine, using lessons learned from our successful resistance to family exploitation to help other elderly people protect their independence and dignity. The community center where I volunteer with literacy programs has dedicated a reading room in honor of my contributions to education and elder advocacy. The plaque recognizes not just financial donations, but also the hundreds of hours spent teaching adults to read and helping senior citizens understand financial planning basics that protect against exploitation. Ashley's wedding next month will be held in my backyard, surrounded by friends and chosen family members who've supported our healing process over the past 3 years. Her fiancé is a fellow social worker who specializes in addiction recovery and appreciates both Ashley's journey and the grandfather who gave her a second chance she hadn't dared hope for. The invitation list includes people who've become family through shared experiences rather than genetic connection. Neighbors who check on me during storms, volunteers who work beside me at the literacy center, fellow investors who meet monthly to discuss market trends and share strategies for protecting assets from scams targeting elderly people. Walking through my neighborhood on morning exercise routines, I often reflect on the journey from victim to survivor, to someone who helps other people avoid similar exploitation. The modest house that my family wanted me to sell has become a symbol of successful resistance to manipulation and proof that elderly people can fight for their rights and win completely. The secret millionaire who hid his wealth for decades now uses that wealth openly to support causes he values and help people who deserve assistance. Financial success that once required camouflage now provides resources for legal protection, charitable giving, and lifestyle choices based on personal preferences rather than family pressure. At 77, I've learned that dignity doesn't depend on family approval, that independence can be maintained throughout aging when proper planning provides necessary resources, and that justice serves both individual victims and broader community protection when people are willing to fight for what's right rather than what's convenient. The phone rings frequently now, but the calls bring invitations to social activities, requests for advice about financial planning, and updates from people whose lives have been enhanced by educational programs my resources have supported. The contrast with months of manipulative family pressure illustrates how dramatically life can improve when relationships are based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The kitchen table where Karen once spread Guardianship Papers now hosts weekly bridge games, monthly investment club meetings, and frequent dinners with friends who value my company for reasons that have nothing to do with my bank account balance. The same space that witnessed the beginning of my family's criminal conspiracy now provides the setting for relationships that enhance rather than threaten my well-being. The mailbox that once brought bank statements my family intercepted now delivers letters from grateful literacy students, updates from charitable organizations my donations support, and invitations to speak at conferences about elder abuse prevention. The systematic surveillance my children conducted has been replaced by genuine interest from people who appreciate my experience and wisdom. 3 years after discovering that my family had been planning to steal my life savings and imprison me in an abusive care facility, I wake up each morning grateful for the resources that allowed me to fight back, the legal representation that made victory possible, and the community relationships that make each day meaningful and enjoyable. The secret millionaire story ended when criminal proceedings made my wealth public knowledge. But the real story continues with each day I live independently, each person I help avoid elder abuse, and each relationship I build based on mutual respect rather than financial manipulation. Justice was served through criminal prosecution and civil judgments, but peace came through community connections and the knowledge that my life's work now supports causes that help other people rather than enabling family members who chose crime over gratitude. The factory workers' $50 monthly investments became more than wealth. They became weapons for defending dignity and tools for building meaning in life's final chapters. Robert Murphy, age 77, Millionaire by planning and survivor by courage. Writing on his birthday, in the home he successfully defended, surrounded by chosen family who value him for who he is rather than what he owns, looking forward to whatever adventures and challenges tomorrow might bring. The secret is no longer secret, but the man who kept it has become something more valuable than wealthy. He has become free. Free to choose relationships based on respect rather than obligation. Free to use his resources for causes that matter rather than family demands that diminish. And free to age with dignity in the home he worked 40 years to buy and successfully fought to keep. The morning sun streams through windows of a house that almost became someone else's inheritance. Warming rooms where genuine laughter has replaced calculated manipulation, where honest conversation has replaced strategic pressure, and where the careful planning of 7 decades continues creating security and meaning for whatever time remains. I close this account of my journey from victim to victor, from secret millionaire to proud survivor, with gratitude for the strength to fight when fighting was necessary, the wisdom to forgive when forgiveness was earned, and the resources to build a life worth living regardless of who chooses to share it. The factory worker who invested $50 a month never imagined his story would end with criminal trials and national media attention. But perhaps that same careful planning that created wealth also created the character necessary to defend it. The secret millionaire learned that the most valuable thing he'd accumulated wasn't money. It was the independence to choose how his story would end. And this story ends with dignity intact, justice served, and hope for tomorrow stronger than regret for yesterday. The phone is ringing again. Probably another invitation to something worthwhile, from people who matter, in a life that finally reflects the values that money was always meant to support. At 77, Robert Murphy is wealthy in every way that counts, and the secret he once guarded so carefully has become the foundation for a legacy that will help protect other elderly people long after he's gone. The sun is setting on another good day in a life that was almost stolen, but was successfully defended. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities to help other people, enjoy meaningful relationships, and use the independence that careful planning purchased to make choices based on what's right rather than what's expected. The secret millionaire's story is complete. But Robert Murphy's life continues with the confidence that comes from knowing he stood up for himself when it mattered most, and won the right to finish his days on his own terms, in his own home, surrounded by people who choose to love him rather than people who feel obligated to tolerate him. This is how dignity looks at 77. Not as a burden being managed by others, but as a man who managed to protect what mattered most when everything he valued was under attack. The factory worker's investments paid the ultimate dividend. A life lived with honor, defended with courage, and shared with people who deserve to be part of it. The end. The sun is setting on another good day in a life that was almost stolen but was successfully defended. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities to help other people, enjoy meaningful relationships, and use the independence that careful planning purchased to make choices based on what's right rather than what's expected.